So let's go back to President Trump's announcement on Afghanistan. Let's talk more about this for the next few minutes. I'm joined from Washington by Mica Mosbacher. She's a supporter of Donald Trump and was a national surrogate during the election campaign for him. I'm also joined by the US Army veteran Luke Kofi, who was deployed to Afghanistan in 2005. He's now at the Heritage Foundation and joins us from there. Welcome both of you here to the programme. Mica, to you first of all. How's this going down with Trump supporters? He told all of you during that campaign there was going to be an end to these foreign wars.
This is the most decisive national security speech I've heard since Ronald Reagan in 1986. And it is remarkable because President Trump has changed his mind, and he admitted it. He said that after interviewing with his national security advisors and listening to McMaster and Mattis, among others, that he recognized that it would not be in our national security interest to withdraw from Afghanistan at this time. And he laid out his strategy for the American people. Most striking is his departure from the Obama policy of calendars and timetables, which Trump feels would give the Taliban an advantage. They just wait us out. More importantly, he is saying that we need a victory for those men and women who served in this forgotten war. They come back from the war, many of them maimed and injured for life, and they feel like that their service has been somewhat forgotten or swept under the rug.
Well,
also, he is changing.
I'll come back to that point in a minute. Luke Kofi, is this the right call from the president, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think what President Trump outlined last night was a reasonable, responsible strategy for the way forward for the U.S. in Afghanistan. Sending additional U.S. advisors to help train and assist the Afghan security forces to allow them to bring the fight to the Taliban, while putting pressure on Pakistan and getting rid of these ridiculous, arbitrary, calendar-based timelines that we saw under the previous administration is the best way forward for the current situation.
And Luke, what do you think the risks are? And is this a winnable war?
Well, it depends how you define winning, really, here. I would say that America's #1 goal in Afghanistan is to create a country that can manage its own internal and external security without tens of thousands of foreign troops on the ground helping them, so they can prevent their country from becoming another safe haven for terrorism like we saw in the 1990s. So in the context of security, yes, the war in Afghanistan is certainly winnable. But when you start going down this rabbit hole of strong central governments, bringing democracy, free and fair elections, when you start confusing the true nature of America's involvement in the country with these vague notions of nation building, that's when you set the campaign up for failure.
Mica, what do you expect the troops to actually be doing? Because we got very little detail. Do you anticipate there is a possibility anyway, if we have another 4,000 troops going, that sooner or later they'll get involved again in direct fighting?
Well, no, I think that the strategy has changed. First of all, he said that he would give his field officers a lot more latitude without interference from Washington, and that he would be moving the troops closer to those fighting fronts. He also stated that he would put, pressure on the Afghani government, of which President Ghani said today that he would welcome. He's going to hold them accountable and certainly not expect the U.S. to be writing a blank check.
But my goodness, I mean, you talk about that, holding them accountable. Yes. That's been said for more than 15 years, again and again, to Afghan presidents, and we've seen nothing when it comes, really, to all of those reforms that have been demanded.
Well, yes, and I think President Trump recognizes that we do need a win using not only our military intervention, but also our economic sanctions and all the tools in our toolbox. He's putting pressure on Pakistan. What was missing from that speech was no pressure on China, which is also the 600-pound gorilla in the room. They exert undue influence on Pakistan and absolutely could be helpful there in terms of forcing them to be accountable to clearing out the militant bases that are their hotbeds of terrorism and Pakistan, and also putting pressure on North Korea, where we also have an arsenal of nuclear weapons. I think that Trump sounded very much like a commander-in-chief, and it sounds to me that he does mean business. This time we cannot afford another failure. We've been, what, $700 billion into this war? UK was involved in this war for 14 years. We need to be accountable to the American people as a whole. And I also think that this speech united Americans, because after 9/11 we did come together, and on the heels of Charlottesville, where the president's words were misconstrued, yep, I think it is notable he stayed very measured and very much precise in how he outlined his strategy to his base. And I think that was significant.
Luke Coffey, the president has said this is not open-ended. It is not a blank check, but if you look at the details with no timelines, no real ways that we can assess what is success, it is exactly that, open-ended, isn't it?
Well, he's made very clear that success in Afghanistan will be creating security conditions on the ground that allow for an eventual political settlement with some elements of the Taliban. I mean, in fact, he's probably the first, well, compared to President Bush before him and President Obama, he's come out very early in his time as president to acknowledge this reality that the Afghans are fighting an insurgency against the Taliban, and all insurgencies, if they are to end successfully, have to end with some sort of political settlement. And he made this very clear last night. Look, success in Afghanistan is going to be measured in years and perhaps decades. It's not going to be measured in 140-character-long tweets, days, or weeks. So he needs to prepare the American public to be patient here. But this doesn't mean we're going back to the days of 2009, 2010, where we have 150,000 U.S. and coalition troops leading combat operations in Afghanistan. We are way past that point.
Well, I'll come back to the point you made.
Lead the operations.
I'll come back to the point you made about selling it in a moment, but in terms of the other passage we heard from President Trump, the strongest passage perhaps aimed at Pakistan, how glad were you to hear him call Pakistan out?
Yeah, I mean, this is very important, but this was probably the most important aspect of his speech and of his strategy, but it's also going to be the most difficult. And we've heard similar things coming from President Bush about this. We've heard similar things coming from President Obama about this. So this is nothing new. But what might be new is that President Trump and those around him might be fed up to the point where they are willing to use some political capital, spend some political capital, use some political leverage, economic leverage against Pakistan to really get them to change their ways. Because Pakistan cannot have it both ways. They cannot say that they're a credible and important partner in the counterterrorism operation, but yet provide safe haven to some elements of the Taliban and its leadership.
Mica, a final word to you, because the Taliban have promised, unless the Americans pull out altogether, to make it another graveyard for American troops. There's talk of 4,000 extra troops being sent. How does Donald Trump sell this to American public that for more than 15 years have watched events in Afghanistan, have watched blood and treasure, as Donald Trump said? He described it as a total disaster. How does he sell this thing?
I think he sold it last night. I think that Americans will support a surge in troops if it is part of a strategy to define a win. I think that that is more important than anything. And also, we forgot one other important point that he brought out was also relying on India, which is an important ally. And the fact that he called on NATO allies as well to pay their part and to help support this strategy for international peace against terrorists. And we are fighting terrorists. We have this problem in our country, certainly on the heels of the disastrous attacks in Barcelona. I think that that is something that all Americans can buy into, regardless of whether they're Democrats or Republicans.
Okay. Mica Mosbacher and Luke Coffey, we have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your time. Thank you.